Okay, welcome back. This one is on Salesforce Flow Orchestrator. Okay, and the importance of the orchestrator is a type of flow. It does allow us to create stages, and in those stages are different types of steps. Okay, so it is going to allow us to build parallel. We can queue up those steps either synchronous or asynchronously, multiple users interacting, multiple step work streams by having decisions to be made on those. Okay, so let's take a look. How should consumers of this API respond to the changes? All right, well, we better read what it's talking about. NTO implements a customer address API to get customer address information. This API is updated in any point exchange from version 1.1.0 to 1.2.0 following semantic versioning best practices. We just talked about semantic versioning, right? So 1.1.0 to 1.2.0 means that there was minor changes, right? And that means that it is backwards compatible. It wasn't a patch, but it means there is some new features available. All right, so these changes are communicated using the API's public portal. All right, and the API endpoint remains the same in the new version. Okay, so there's no changes to the endpoint. It's a minor change. How should consumers of this API respond to that change? All right. This actually sounds a lot like the previous question. I think this actual question is belonging to the MuleSoft group. It is not an orchestrator question. Anyway. All right. So how should consumers of this API respond to the changes? If it is this a 1.1.0 to a 1.2.0. All right. So the API consumer, that's the person using it, needs to identify the update as a project risk. And perform full regression testing of this functionality. That's not the case. The API developer should be requested to run the old version in parallel with the new one. Okay, well, it's backwards compatible. They don't have to do that. Okay, the API developer should be contacted to identify the change to the existing functionality. Okay, so the API developer, yeah, they need to know that there is a change to the existing, well, there is a change, but the existing functionality that the user was using has not changed. It's backwards compatible. So if we look at A, the consumer only needs to modify their code if they want to use the new change. Okay. So A is the correct answer, and this clearly does belong in the MuleSoft category. Okay. So those are the kind of scenarios you're going to see more than likely on the exam, something like that. And that one was all about semantic versioning. Now, this one sounds like it is more truly an orchestration question. Okay, so in this one, according to best practices, how should NTO use flow orchestration to manage the approval processes? Okay, so the fullness of the question is NTO has a complex process that involves several approval processes to be completed. And how can we manage that approval process? Use subflows with interactive steps? No. Build multiple flow orchestrations with interactive steps to handle the approval process. Okay. Let me see about that one, because flow orchestrations with some interactive steps would do the approval process, but building multiple flow orchestrations may not be necessary. Let's keep reading. Use flow orchestration to invoke a Salesforce approval process as needed during the process. I am not so certain about that one, because you're still needing to have those approvals be done by different groups. Okay. Then A is use interactive steps to collect the outputs of the approval process and govern upcoming steps. Now that's it. Although C could, the only thing that throws me on C is multiple orchestrations. You wouldn't do that. So A is the correct answer here. A is the correct answer. Again, kind of assessing and determining. All right, so how can it be achieved? Let's see what we need to do. NTO has a multi-step process. Based on the data of related records, NTO wants to declare different exit criteria for their flow orchestration stage. Right? Different exit criteria. Now, if you took the fundamentals class, not fundamentals, I'm sorry. If you took the hyperautomation class, you may not have covered this. If you've been in my exam prep classes or you've been in my fast track, I cover this. And what I make sure to cover it, because I know I had no clue what it was talking about when I was first learning it, is that there is a type of flow called an evaluation flow. And the evaluation flow allows you to do this very thing. It allows you to determine how you exit out of a stage. Okay, and again, if you look back at your flow orchestration stages, you will see this. So I'm not even going to go over the others. It is the evaluation flow that gives you the ability to manage and to declare different exit criteria. Okay. NTO has a flow orchestration that assigns work items to the contract or to the contact record or on, let me reread this. NTO has a flow orchestration that assigns work items on the contact record to a public group that is using a private sharing model. Okay. So this one's a little confusing if you don't have a good understanding of Salesforce sharing models. Okay. And that we're talking about a public group for their access. Okay. So that causes some confusion in regards to the answer to this question. In which two ways will the sharing model impact the design and use of their orchestration? Okay. And flow orchestration items will automatically provide temporary access. That's not true. Work items use sharing conditions independent of the related record and are separate from the private sharing model. I have been told that that is not true. And A and B are actually the correct answers in that the related contact record should be shared with that public group when a work item is assigned as part of this solution. So that related contact record should be shared with that public group. So that's managing that access to that contact record. And then privately shared records will be visible to the owner and specific related users via your automated sharing rules by default. So if you're the owner of that shared record, you're going to have access. If you specify users, also by default, they will have access too. So some of this is relevant to Salesforce roles and their permissions based on whether you're owner or any particular group. Okay, so A and B are the correct answers. Again, this has got to do with the shared model, a public group, and the permissions here. Okay, finally, this is the last question. Which two concepts should the admin be aware of while designing and testing a orchestration flow? Choose two. Okay, NTO provides their Salesforce admin with several use cases for their flow orchestration. All right, so 2 concepts should be, the admin should be aware of. So this is where you're thinking about your role as a Salesforce admin. All right, so looking at these. Okay, last but not least, on the last question here, I had to pause. So if I've already said that and I said it twice, forgive me because I had to pause the recording. All right, NTO provides their Salesforce admin with several use cases for their flow orchestration. All right, yeah, I already did read this. Anyway, so sorry about that. Which 2 concepts should the admin be aware of while designing and testing the flow? Okay, so we are talking about flow orchestration. All right, so these are the things we want to consider when we're talking about flow orchestration. So one of these is D, a stage of the flow orchestration will pass even if a background step encounters an error. Okay, a stage of the flow orchestration will pass. Now you can set one to pass. So that's a configuration you can set. But when we're talking about 2 concepts the admin should be aware of while designing and testing the flow, and I'm not thinking, it's a configuration that you would do. Debug mode can be invoked through a REST API for flow orchestration to monitor individual steps. No, that is not true, actually. Evaluation flows should only be executed through a flow orchestration. That is true. That is true. And we talked about the evaluation flows on a previous question. Flow orchestrations are designed to work with multiple users and departments for a single process. That is true. That is true. So A and B are going to be the correct answers here. A stage of the flow orchestration will pass even if a background step encounters an error. I don't think that that is right, but I know A and B are correct. So again, sometimes it'll be kind of partial right, and you're like, but you want to go with what's very strong. And these A and B is very strong. So that's a wrap. You're into the scoring table, and for the most part, the scoring table is right, except for one answer that was wrong. So that is on that semantic version question in the MuleSoft category. There was a semantic version question that was wrong. It's this one. 55 is wrong. It's not A, it's D. So thus far, those are the only ones I've seen that were wrong. If you see one that may be wrong, point it out to me. I'd love to hear about it. So that's a wrap, folks. That is all of the questions on the practice exam. Do not memorize the answers because the questions on the real exam, although they may be very similar, there are going to be things about it that are going to throw the question in a different way, okay? Or throw, the question will have some details in it that are going to throw the answer. So FYI, be aware of that. And that's it for the recordings. Let me know how you're doing on the exam, and I will celebrate your success. If you have a fail, then get your report and send it to me, and I will help and give you some coaching ideas. So have a great time. Thank you so much.